in the 60s were saying, you got to go to New York, you've got to get a background in art, So my wife and I moved to New York in '73 with the idea that we were going to, stay here for a couple of years and get ourselves educated as to, what was going on in the center of the art world. Well, little did I know, and little did the mentors know, what I would end up doing. I became fascinated with graffiti and started taking pictures of it in the mid-'70s. And my obsession with catching these photographs eventually led me to meet graffiti writers, who were pretty underground and weren't exactly willing to expose themselves. But I did, in fact, meet them, and the photographs that I took were a kind of ticket into acceptance by them as being a trustworthy person and not a cop. And so I was really well placed in the early '80s when the world became interested in hip-hop and graffiti, so that a filmmaker named Tony Silver got in touch with me, and because I knew nothing about film at that point, and he said, let's make a film. This is really, something, a really great subject. So that was the beginning of the idea of doing Style Wars. And it took us a year or two to raise the money to do it, and it took us another year or so to actually shoot and edit the film, and it finally came out on PBS in 1984. It happened that it was, I think it's probably the first documentary or big documentary that was made, and so it still brings with it the original culture of people who were painting the trains, and also the original sort of battlegrounds of the b-boy culture. And it is also shows the transition of that moment in history when the world became interested in it, and sort of the beginning of the widespread diffusion of hip-hop around the world. So that's how the film began. And I'm going to stick around afterwards, and I will answer questions. So I hope you enjoy the film. Thank you. Well, we've got this DVD that came out in 2003, 2004, something like that. And to do that, we went and we interviewed a bunch of writers, and that was 20 years after the film was made. And so there's, Daz, and Tony and I did it with Joey Garfield, who's a young filmmaker, and he really, we invited him to kind of produce it, and we went around with him because we knew everybody, and we, we saw a number of the writers who were in the film again. So you can get the DVD. It's the 2-disc set. That's the one that has it. And then there's a single disc set called, or it's not a set, single disc called Style Wars Revisited. And it has a compressed version of the interviews with all the people. It takes about 2 hours. The Revisited has it compressed down to a half an hour, and it's fun. It's a new edit. I'm also working on a DVD set of all my train photos. I have about 850 trains shot in the era between 1977 and 1982 about. And we're putting that together with 50 interviews of people from back in those days. So we're working on that. That should come out at the end of the year or maybe the beginning of next year. And I have a teaser over on the table of what that's going to be like, the photographs and the interviews with a couple of the writers.
I wanted to know what inspired you to go and film this documentary. What was it about the art in itself that inspired you to go and do this documentary? And do you you feel as though you could possibly do another documentary showing where it is today and how it's gone globally?
Yeah. Well, I was inspired, like I said, as an artist myself, and being more of an expressionist type of artist. You know, I was doing abstract expressionist type painting before I made sculpture, and then I was in a modernist vein with my sculpture, so I was creating form. And I dropped into New York in the 70s, when it was, you know, the center of the art world, but they had moved on from modernism into, or well, it was modernism taken to its extreme, and there was minimal art and conceptual art were the big things, which, while interesting, were not moving sensually to me, and so I was missing that. And I was seeing it instead on the trains. And I thought, oh, this is very exciting. Visually, it's wonderful, and these are, you know, self-taught, untrained artists doing it, and that's even better. And I was watching the evolution take place very quickly in those years, between like 73 and 76. And by that time, I realized that the trains ran outside. You know, I got out of my Manhattan tunnel and ended up in the Bronx with elevated, and I could see that you could take pictures of it. So that was my inspiration. And like I say, you know, Tony, who was the director, and we got together, and it was really a good collaboration because he could be objective, and he could use his skills as a filmmaker, whereas I was connected into the scene, and I could be his guide, and basically that's how he worked, and I think, you know, that was good. If he had tried to do it by himself, he could never have done it. If I had tried to do it by myself, I would have done something that would have been just from the point of view of the writers, because I wasn't seeing it in any kind of, you know, expansive way, the way Tony did, in terms of it's a big drama in the city. It's New York City who is the character, not just the writers. And so that's how that happened. Yeah, first, yeah.
Yeah, I have a two-part question. I need to know, how did you get the graffiti artists who Mayor Koch are calling vandals and criminals, yeah, to actually admit to doing this and to allow you to film it? You know, I mean, they can face criminal prosecution. And the other question I'm going to ask for my film class, because I think we'd be interested to know, how were you able to convince people to give you guys money so that you can do a film about graffiti vandals?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, so, I mean, at the beginning, I was visible. I was spending a lot of time on the elevated trains and the stations taking pictures. Kids saw me. They knew about me for 2 years, but like I say, they were underground and they weren't going to reveal themselves to me because for all they knew, I was a cop. I did not fit the demographic of a kid, right? I was already practically 40 at that time. And so it was finally, some kid he was taking pictures too, and I was taking pictures, so there was no escaping it. If I was a cop, it was over for him anyway. So he came up to me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I showed him my pictures, and he said, "Wow, this is something. That's my cousin, you know." And he said, "If you want to meet writers, go to the bench at 149th Street and the Grand Concourse after school hours, 3 o'clock. So I went there, and it was as he told me. Here were all these guys standing around with black books, sharing the black books, and I showed them my photographs, and you know, it was like, okay, I became kind of the unofficial photographer, documenter for them. So flash forward to 1981, and Tony and I got together. I'd known them for 2 or 3 years, and nobody had ever busted them in my circle, you know, so they felt confident in me. It was, of course, just before we started making the film, there was somebody, a journalist had taken a group into the yard, or the group had taken the journalist in, and when they emerged, the kids were arrested. So it was, you know, a little tricky. So we couldn't go into the yards to make the film. You know, it would have been really hard because film, it's not like video, you don't go in clandestinely. With a big camera, you've got to have a crew and a sound man and a line producer and everybody. There are about 5 or 6 people have to go in, and we realized we could never pull that off. So Tony knew somebody who knew Mayor Koch, and we approached the mayor, who said, yeah, it's a good idea to make a documentary. And then he sent us to the MTA and sort of gave the go-ahead. And we were able to make a deal with them that we would make the film. We wouldn't, you know, try to trash them. And they, in turn, wouldn't arrest any of the kids as long as we didn't do anything illegal on film. So that was why we could go into the tunnels and shoot the trains in the tunnels. They even let the kids, actually, the kids painted that train that they yell and scream about when it comes out early on in the film. And that was all okay. They knew that the kids were doing it, and they let it run.